Welcome, everyone. We will, with the help of Hashem, begin a new series with regards to the Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, the 7 universal Noahide commandments. At this point, I would like to make somewhat of an introduction. In our classes in the past, we've covered a great deal of laws, how they pertain to the nations of the world from various different sources. And as a rule, what we do in this class, the style of this class is that we study everything inside, that I actually read it from the original text, from the source, translate, and then attempt to explain it. 7 mitzvahs. And we've said on many occasions that they really branch off into many more details. And there's different opinions. How many do they include? Some 30 or more. And as we've mentioned, there's a whole, each one of them contains many details. And then there are other subjects which are related to the observance of the Sheva Mitzvahs and to the responsibility of every human being, of a ben Noach, that are not necessarily one of the 7, but yet they are incorporated. For example, education, charity, honoring parents, being fruitful and having children, etc. All of those are obligations that every human being has, although they're not part of the list of the 7. What has been lacking is a code of Jewish law for the non-Jewish, for the Gentile world, for the world of the Bnei Noach. Now, there are different terms how we refer to a ben Noach in the rabbinic literature. Sometimes the person is called a chassid, chasidei umois ha'olam. And in English, they translate that as the pious of the nations of the world. Whether that's an accurate translation or not, but that's the accepted translation. The root of the word chassid or chasidei actually comes from the word chesed, which means kindness. So the kind people of the nations of the world. Then there are those that are in the category of Ger Toshav, which, as we spoke many times, that Maimonides tells us a number of times that we cannot accept a formal Ger Toshav unless we have the Yovel, the Jubilee year, in effect, and that we can only have when we have all the Jewish people residing in the land of Israel. So that hasn't been the case for thousands of years. That ceased in the middle of the first temple. However, we do have individuals that are trying to live up to the would-be status of a Ger Toshav. And then you have a few other terms used for the righteous of the nations. But as we've mentioned many times, basically, without going into detail, basically, there are 2 types of people, of human beings. There is the chosen people, known as Bnei Yisrael, or Am Yisrael, and in the common language in English, it's referred to as the Jewish people, biblically the children of Israel, otherwise today known as the Jewish people or the Jews. That's one type of an individual. Those are the people that God chose and gave us the Torah, gave us the law at the revelation at Mount Sinai some 3,300 years ago. So today anybody who's Jewish is a direct descendant in an unbroken maternal chain, going back all the way to Sinai, to those original Jewish people that were there. Or, alternatively, has converted kahalacha. A ger, he became a Jew according to Jewish law. And I stress that because unfortunately there are a lot of conversions out there which are absolutely worthless. They may call themselves conversion, they're not. And it's tricking and fooling, unfortunately, many of the very pious and very sincere people out there that want to embrace God in a Jewish way and want to become part of the Jewish nation, and they don't know better in many cases, and they go through various different conversions, and the only way to do it is the way that God prescribes in the written and primarily in the oral tradition. And that comes all the way down to the Code of Jewish Law, known as the Shulchan Aruch. The Code of Jewish Law, which was compiled and written some 500 years ago by Rabbi Yosef Karo. So if a person goes through the stages necessary to become a Jewish convert, then that person is as Jewish as if they were born from a Jewish mother. There are certain details which will differ, but otherwise, overall, basically, they are as Jewish as any other Jew. That's all one type of person, the Jew. Then you have another type of human being, only one other category, and that is the rest of the world. The Bnei Noach, which literally means the sons, which includes, of course, the females, the daughters, of Noah. And in a broader sense, you can call them Bnei Adam, which means the descendants of the first man that was created by God nearly 6,000 years ago. Adam. And that's every human being, of course. So everyone who's not Jewish, which is the majority of the world, of course, all the billions of people on the planet, have an obligation, a responsibility, and therefore the right and the necessity to keep the God-given 7 laws. Very nice. Unfortunately, for many, many generations, people did not know or did not have the proper education or information. It's there, it's in the Talmud, and it tells it to us, Maimonides documents it, but for all practical purposes, the Jewish people's involvement in that was very minimal, and therefore the non-Jewish world, depending on which point in world history and where we're talking about geographically, were either involved for many, many generations, for centuries, were involved, unfortunately, in idolatry and worshiping all sorts of other gods and what have you, all sorts of nonsense, which is a prohibition. Otherwise, you had people in certain times that are atheists and don't believe at all. Or then you have people that claim to be agnostic. So you have a lot of confusion if you just take world history and the observance and the relationship between the human being and his creator. So for a very large part of that, there's a lot of confusion, to say the least. And you do have individuals that are seeking the truth. As of recently, it's, again, with some exceptions, but it's fair to say, to make the following claim. Our generation of just the past few decades, there has become an awareness, and people have searched and found the truth, which is the God-given truth for all the nations of the world. Now, I'm going to make a few claims, and for many of you, what I'm saying is quite obvious and simple, and then perhaps for others it's not. So I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. The Jewish religion does not proselytize in the sense of seeking converts. Not at all. I mean, I don't know that much about other religions, but basically, I think it's fair to say that the other major religions want people to accept their faith. And they go even further and they say that whoever doesn't is doomed, whatever. But I'm going to focus on that which I do know a bit about, because I don't know that much about other religions. The Jewish religion is very adamant about this position. And the position is that if you're a born Jew, And I'm not talking about born again, a person who was born Jewish. His mother is Jewish because her mother and her mother, like I said. Or the person converted according to Jewish law, kahalacha, by Jewish law. Then that person is required, obligated, and has the right, and therefore should make the proper choice of adhering and observing and keeping to the best of their ability God's commandments for the Jews. Now the number that we always throw out there is 613, 613 commandments. However, the truth of the matter is that on a practical level, most of those commandments do not apply practically. For one, if you don't have the Holy Temple standing in Jerusalem, and if you're not living in the land of Israel, unfortunately, most of those commandments are not in effect, and the Jew cannot literally keep them. That's one. And then, in addition to that, out of the 613 commandments, some of them apply only to the Kohanim, the Jewish priests. Some of them, a few, apply only to the king. That's just one person when you have a king. And so on. However, collectively speaking, how many commandments do the Jewish people have? As a whole, 613. 613 with many, many details and many, many laws. And then later on, as the generations went on, there are rabbinic ordinances where the sages and the rabbis of each generation made various different laws, mostly as safeguards for the biblical law. All right? So if the Torah says that this is forbidden, so they may have extended it, and they make it very clear that this is their own extension, and they're doing it for the benefit of the people. But there's a lot to say about that. I just wanted to touch upon that. Getting back to this. The Jewish people have to keep as many as they can. So, for example, there is arguably the most basic commandment for the Jew. The most basic. And if I were to ask you to guess, you would probably guess a particular commandment, but I'm referring to another one. The one I'm referring to is to love your fellow as yourself. V'ohavta l'reyacha kamoicha. It's a verse in the book of Leviticus in Parshas Kedoshim, I believe it's chapter 19, where it states clearly an outright directive, a commandment, that you, the Jew, are to love your fellow Jew as yourself. Because of that, every Jew carries a responsibility towards his fellow Jews. And therefore, in the appropriate way, in the appropriate time, with all sorts of conditions, there is a commandment of reprimanding or rebuking a fellow Jew for doing something which is forbidden. For instance, every single Jew is required and obligated to observe and to keep the holy Shabbos, the Sabbath, from nightfall on Friday until after nightfall on Saturday. There are so many things that are forbidden for a Jew to do. For those of you that are a little bit familiar with the practical observance of Shabbos or have been around Jewish people or Jewish community, you may have an idea of what I'm talking about. For others, you have no idea. And if you just open up the Bible, the Chumash, and you read what it says over there, you have no idea what it really means to keep Shabbos. So it depends on who's listening out there. And in our crowd over here, I think most of you here have an appreciation and know up close what Shabbos is like. Now, every Jew is obligated to be a Shabbos observant Jew. And I am purposely staying away from any types of so-called labels. And I tried to make that clear a couple minutes ago when I said there's two types of people, the Jew and the Noahide. That's it. There are no such thing as a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a this, that. You have a nationality, fine. If you were born in France, or if you're a descendant of the original French people, then you're French. or you're a Spaniard, or you're German, whatever. That's so to say, incidental. You're a Noahide. If you're not Jewish, you're a Noahide. It makes no difference where you were born and which nation you're from. There's originally 70 nations. These are the laws for all 70 nations. Likewise, in the Jewish world, some of you may have heard of different brands of Judaism. Some of you, this may be foreign to you, and in that case, I almost feel bad that I'm even bringing them up. But for the sake of clarity, I'm going to mention them. These are some, and there could be more, and people can invent more. They call it Orthodox Judaism. Then there's conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, etc. Not necessarily in that order, because I think first came the Reform. That's why the conservative are called conservative, because relative to the Reform. All of that is basically nonsense. Now, I did say Orthodox, and one might say, aren't you an Orthodox rabbi? Technically, I may have to admit that I am, but I don't like that title, because there's rabbi, or there's Torah, I should say, there's observance, there's an observant Jew, there's what the book says. Now, no one is perfect, so sometimes we fall short, but we cannot philosophically disagree and say, oh, I choose to keep these 612 instead of 613. No. There are 613, or whatever they amount to be practically. I have to keep all the ones that I am obligated to keep. Do I? That's a different story. But you can't start to rationalize or to philosophize and say, well, this doesn't apply, this I don't have to keep. We have shortcomings, fine. So that's on a behavioral level, we may not live up to what our responsibility is. But we have to be honest, intellectually honest, and first thing, we have to know what is the responsibility that we have. So as a Jew, there is the Shulchan Aruch, there's the Code of Jewish Law. That's the only brand of Judaism that exists. The God-given, written, and then the oral tradition of Judaism. That's it. That's all. Same thing when it comes to the Bnei Noach. God gave the 7 commandments, originally, of course, to Adam and to Noah, but the reason why the world has to keep them is, as we discussed many times, Maimonides explains it very clearly in the Laws of Kings, because they're God-given at Sinai through Moses. Not only did he give the 613 for the Jewish people, but he gave the 7 to the non-Jewish world. Fine. Problem, though. Practically speaking, for the Jew, it's pretty clear what the observance has to look like. All the do's and the don'ts, all the positive commandments, the negative commandments, the prohibitions, that's pretty clear. I mean, it's a lifetime of studying, and you will find that the Jewish people, the people of the book, they grow old over the book. They start when they are really, really young. People know that the Jewish people are always studying, and we're always delving deeper into it. That's true. But nonetheless, it's quite clear what a Jew needs to do, what they can't do, and whenever you have a doubt, so then there are the authorities that give the Jewish ruling, and each person can contact his so-called rabbi, or the person who is an expert in Jewish law, ask him what to do, what not to do, how does it apply. In the non-Jewish world, unfortunately, there has been a lack of that. And now, in the past couple of decades, when so many people are taking an interest in becoming what's a so-called Noahide, in other words, to connect to God through keeping his commandments. And those are the 7. So it's very nice. And the list of 7 are, you can just rattle them off. It's just 7 laws. And 6 out of the 7 are negative. They're prohibitions. Don't. All right, so then that's really cool. I just don't do anything that I can't do. So, and then there's a lot of details. How do I observe and keep those commandments, especially if you want to be spiritual and you want to have some kind of a connection to God? So does such a person need to convert and become Jewish? I would say no. Can that person have a relationship with God? Absolutely. Prayer. I mentioned a whole bunch of things. I didn't mention prayer. Prayer is also one of them. Non-Jews are encouraged to pray to God. If you need something, so then you turn to God. Aside for doing what you need to do in the natural course of events, if it's a matter of a medical condition, so you go to the professional, go to the physician. If it's a matter of business, so then you go to the experts in that area. But if you have a need, you turn to God and you ask Him to help you, to give you, I need, I want, etc. So, what do we do now? There isn't no Shulchan Aruch for the non-Jews to keep their 7. Now, the Rebbe Melech HaMoshiach promoted this campaign and actually started the campaign and the awareness in the secular year of, it was around 1982-83. And that's when he began speaking at length on many occasions about the importance of spreading the information, educating and teaching and promoting the 7 Noahide commandments. Fine. But now on a practical level, when a Jew comes to a non-Jew and says, okay, here are the 7. So I can give you a card that has the 7. I can give you a booklet that has the 7. But since then, things have developed because we realize that if I want to get these billions of people to keep it, so there are all sorts of websites and organizations and doing wonderful things. There's one particular organization and a set of books, not to the exclusion of any others. I am by no means excluding anyone. And by now, there are many books about the 7 Noahide commandments, written in different forms and different styles. Some focus more on the philosophical aspect. Some focus more on the technical aspect. So, Rabbi Moshe Weiner, who apparently is a tremendous Talmud Chacham, Torah scholar, finally, this may not be the first thing, but I do believe that it's the most exhausted. This is just amazing. Sefer Sheva Mitzvot HaShem. This is the book of the 7 commandments of God. This is volume 1. Beis, volume 2. Gimel, volume 3. 3 volumes. And as you can see, the hardcover books, and they're not so thin, they cover, or they attempt to cover, all the laws, how they pertain to keeping the 7 Noahide commandments. And they have very detailed references and footnotes. So each chapter over here has lengthy footnotes where he brings down the sources. Now, it's a tremendous responsibility to write such a thing, and questions come up. The problem is, you can have a rabbi who's an authority on Jewish law. Now, certain people are experts in certain fields. So you can have a very knowledgeable and a very high-ranking level of a rabbi of rabbis, where his expertise is in the entire code of Jewish law. That's unusual. They should be an expert in all parts of the Shulchan Aruch of the Jewish code of law. He may know it all, he may have gone through it all, but to be an expert, those are very few. Generally speaking, when it comes to giving an absolute ruling, there are experts in various different areas. And that's okay, that's fine. And then you know that if this is a serious question which has to do with this issue, then these are the people to ask. And if it has to do with that issue, you ask those people. When it comes to the Sheva Mitzvahs, unfortunately, even some of the very learned and very responsible and very authoritative rabbis are not experts to the extent of being able to give a clear-cut ruling, because it hasn't been dealt with for hundreds of years or more. So now here we come into a situation of just the past few decades, and now we need to actually have clear-cut laws. So Rabbi Weiner took the initiative, and he did that which so desperately needed to be done. And he actually gave the material to one of the greatest and most authoritative rabbis of our generation, Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, who lives in the Holy Land of Israel, to review it, and that he should give his approval, which he did. Now, does that mean that all of the authorities agree with everything that it says in this book? No. If you ever study any law, certainly if you ever study Jewish law, there's almost no such thing as everybody agreeing on specifics and on details. We all agree on the general rule, but then when you get into the details, there are a lot of arguments. And that's part of the great power that an authority has, that he's able, according to the rules and according to his understanding, to determine which way we're going to follow. So in this case, he had to follow a certain path. So what he does is, he often will write something, and because he's writing it to be practical, he's not going to just list the various opinions and say, well, when it comes to this case, some say it's permitted, some say it's forbidden. So what am I supposed to do? What is the person who is a ben noyach, what is he supposed to do? So therefore, he will tell you his ruling, and in the footnote, he may bring down other opinions or explain to you who he's following. So it's done in a very fair and in a very clear way. However, problem is, it's written in the holy tongue, in the holy language of Lashon HaKodesh, or commonly known today as Hebrew. So the first thing that the Ben Noach has to do is become proficient in Hebrew. And it's no secret that today most Jews, even ones living in Israel, but let's put them aside, they unfortunately can't read the Hebrew and understand it. That's the situation we're in today. This is exile, and it's been forgotten. This is our language. This was the Jewish language. It is the Jewish language, and this is the language in which we conversed about 3,000 years ago. But since then, so many things have happened, and so many changes, and it became Aramaic, and then it became, for the Ashkenazic Jewry, most recently Yiddish, and now I think it's fair to say that it's probably English. So what are we supposed to do with a 3-volume wonderful book which covers all the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach in detail in Hebrew without vowels? The Hebrew language has vowels that go under and over and next to the letters in order to read it. And if it doesn't have any vowels, it's very difficult to read. Just to use an example you can relate to in English. So take out all the vowels and spell something without vowels. So it's pretty much the same idea, maybe even be more difficult in the Hebrew. If you take out all the English vowels and just use the consonants, it's hard to read. Well, the same thing and maybe even worse when you're trying to read it. It's just, so what do? So then they came along and they translated to a great degree the 3 volumes of Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, and it's called The Divine Code. And it's very exciting because just now, the 3rd edition has just come off the press. The 3rd edition. Nice thick book, and it covers much of the 7 Noahide commandments. This is the code of law, the Shulchan Aruch, for the non-Jewish world. Great. Is it as good as the original Hebrew? No. First of all, no translation can be as good as the original. You have to lose something in the translation. Secondly, the Hebrew goes into such great detail, especially the footnotes, it would basically be impossible to make a practical translation of that. It wouldn't be practical to translate it word for word, line for line, literally with all the footnotes. So, number one, what I strongly would suggest and urge everybody and anybody, if you don't have it yet, get hold of the Divine Code. That's number one. And the name of the organization is Ask Noah International, and you can contact them, get in your bookstores, however you want to order it. The email is 7laws@asknoah, Noah.org. That's the first thing I would suggest. And if you read English, and if you understand English, this is the book. Read it. If some parts are more difficult for you, read it again, study it, learn it. It's not a storybook, all right? And I don't think that I need to read it to you and go over it piece by piece with you, although that's an option. What we're going to try to do, with the help of Hashem, is start a new series now. And that is to do as we've done until now, with the various different sources and references that we've been studying, whether it's the Talmudic Encyclopedia, which is in Hebrew, which we've read word for word, whether it's in the subject of Goy, the entry Goy, or the entry Ger Toshav, whatever, and other things. So too, let's try to go through Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, and this way, at least, you will be able to hear and have some type of access to the original. And we'll try to go through the whole thing. Now, I cannot guarantee that we're going to do all the footnotes, because some of them are just really so detailed, and it will take us a very long time. But we can start, because if you don't start, you don't get anywhere. Being that I'm mentioning and I'm promoting, you should buy and study and read and observe what it says over here. Again, a couple things. A, sort of a disclaimer, I'm not taking responsibility that everything that he rules over here is in fact halacha, but there isn't really any other book like it. I mean, he's not the first, and there are other things written, and I'm afraid to start mentioning books because there's so many, but I will mention just two others. There are many. One of them is in modern day, in English, the first one, I believe it's fair to say that it's the first one that came out on the Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, right when the Rabbi Moshe Weiner came out with his campaign, and that is by Chaim Chlorfin and co-authored with Rabbi Rogalski, I think. And the name of the book is The Pathway of the Righteous Gentile, something like that. The Pathway of the Righteous Gentile. It may be out of print now. You may have to search how you get books that are out of print. And that is the first book, and that is really, really great. No question about it. Someone had to break through, and he also had it it was checked over and approved by a leading Torah authority, Jewish law authority of the time, Rabbi Mendel Feldman of Baltimore at the time. But it's nothing compared to this, just in size. That just gives you an overview and an idea of what the 7 commandments are. This goes into detail. This tells you what can you do, what can't you do. It doesn't mean that after you finish studying this, you won't have any questions. Fine. So then you have to ask an authoritative rabbi on the 7 mitzvahs. One other book I want to mention. To Perfect the World, which came out by Sichas in English, which is the English division of the talks of the Rabbi Moshe Weiner. And the one who compiled this and put it together is Rabbi Oliver, Yehoshaphat Oliver. And he did an excellent job. Excellent job. And this is basically a compilation and a synopsis of the talks that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach gave over the years. It's not a Shulchan Aruch, it's not a code of law as the Divine Code is, but if you want to understand why and what about keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs, this would be an excellent book to get. And I'm not going to mention any other books, although there are other really good books out there. With that, let us begin. And there's a preface to volume 1 over here, and then afterwards there is the introduction, both of which are quite lengthy. The preface is very long. And again, the style of this class is, for better or for worse, we read inside, translate, and then we explain it. So I'm starting really from the beginning. I'm skipping the table of contents. And this is called Mavoi, the preface. Aleph. Matras HaSefer. The goal, the purpose of this book. So he's now going to explain, the author is going to explain what is the goal of writing this book. Sefer Zeba lelaket mitera shebal peh upiske rabbeinu hagoinim estvar Hashem zu halacha bibir Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. This book is coming here to compile from the oral Torah and from the rulings of our great sages the Word of God, which is referred to in the Talmud by that's a reference to halacha, Jewish law, in explaining the 7 Noahide commandments. In order to instruct the Bnei Noach the way of Hashem, the way of God. This is the proper way in which they shall go. Until they will merit through it that by following these 7 commandments and following this path, they will merit to have the title of Chassid, the pious of the nations of the world. Because whoever keeps the 7 commandments properly, because they're God given through Moses, as we said, is considered from the pious, from the Chassid of the nations of the world. Umatras HaSefer, and the goal of this book, L'lamed livnei Noach dinehem, to teach to the Bnei Noach world their laws. Hachoiva v'aptur ha'asur v'mutar, that which is obligatory, that which the person is exempt, that which is forbidden, that which is permitted. In order to assist them in fulfilling the 7 commandments which they were commanded to keep properly, according to the law. Mishnois Tavshin Mem Vo'elach. Yatza Harebe Mem Shin Milubavitch Likriya L'chol Boi Ha'elam L'kaim Sheva Mitzvos Elu. From the years of 5750, which means the early 1980s and on, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, King Mashiach, came out with a call to all people of the world, L'chol Boi Ha'elam, to all inhabitants of the world, L'kaim Sheva Mitzvos Elu, to keep, to fulfill these 7 commandments. Ulivnei Yisrael, and he called upon the Jewish people, Lashpia, to influence, Ulishachneya, and to convince, Es Bnei Noach, the sons of Noah, B'chashivus Sheva Mitzvoseim v'tzerich kiyumim, in the importance of their 7 commandments and in the necessity to keep them. L'or kriyazu, in light of this call, so the Noahides, the sons of Noah, began to take an interest, and they are trying to find out more details about their 7 commandments. And for this need, this book has been produced. To place before them like a set table, which that is the actual term for the code of Jewish law. Literally, it means a set table. Dinim mevuarim u'mefuratim, laws that are explained and that are delineated in detail. Minumakim al pi hamakoros asher itzlachti lefi yecholti hamugbolos lesef ulchaber me'achad lesefer echad. They're explained according to the sources which I have succeeded to the best of my limited ability to gather and compile together into one book. And I'm going to open up the whole idea over here with explaining the approach of Maimonides in the form of what exactly is the obligation of the Bnei Noach to keep their 7 commandments. And what is the obligation of the Jewish people to compel, if you will, the Bnei Noach to accept upon themselves and to fulfill their 7 laws. Base. Rambam. We're now going to explain the words of Maimonides, where he says that Moses, our teacher, was commanded by God Almighty that we, the Jewish people, should compel all of the people of the world. Maimonides, in the end of chapter 8 of the Laws of Kings, wrote as follows. Halacha Yud. He writes in the 10th law of this 8th chapter. Moses, our teacher, has given as an inheritance the Torah and the commandments solely to the Jewish people. Shenemar, for as the verse states, Moirasha Kihilas Yankov, that it is an inheritance to the congregation of Jacob, meaning the Jewish people, exclusively. Alternatively, anyone from the rest of the nations of the world that wants to convert and become Jewish. Shenemar, because of the verse that states, Kachem kager, just like you, so too the ger, the convert. So from that we know that the Torah is available for is required and given as an inheritance for every Jew, as well as anybody who joins the Jewish people properly. Aval, however, Nishalei Ratza, one who does not want, Ein Koifenois L'Kabel Torah Mitzvahs. We do not force a person to accept upon himself the Torah and the commandments. Likewise, Moses, our teacher, was commanded by God Almighty to force all of the people of the world to accept upon themselves the commandments that all of the Noahides were commanded. And anyone who will not accept them shall be put to death, shall be killed. And one who does accept them, this person is the one who has the title of Ger Toshav, of an alien resident, every place. That's what we refer to him as throughout our Torah. And this acceptance, this formal acceptance of the non-Jew, the Ben Noach, he has to accept the 7 commandments in front of 3 Torah scholars, or 3 people that are God-fearing and observant. And anyone who accepts upon himself to be circumcised, and 12 months went by and he didn't circumcise himself. From the time that he accepted upon himself to be circumcised, 12 months have elapsed. And now there's different versions to what it should say over here. In some prints it says, Kimin ha'umois, that he is like a heretic of the nations of the world, or Kimin min ha'umois. Whatever the case is, that's the reading of this particular halacha. Halacha Yud Aleph, the next ruling, says the Rambam, Maimonides. Kol ha'makabel Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, anyone who accepted upon himself these 7 and is careful to observe them. Behold, that individual is from the pious of the nations of the world, and he has a share in the world to come. Vihu, but this is provided that that he will accept them, and he will do them, will keep them, only he accepts them and he keeps them because God, the Holy One, blessed be He, has commanded us in the Torah, and has informed us through Moses, our teacher, that originally the sons of Noah were commanded to keep them. However, if this individual is keeping the 7 because logically his mind, his rationale dictates that this is the right thing to do, Ein ze Ger Toshav, this person is not a Ger Toshav, and he is not from the pious of the nations. And here again we have a very crucial difference between the two versions. One says, rather, he is from the wise of the nations. He's a smart man. He's keeping all of these God-given laws because they make sense to him. But he's not a righteous person. He's a wise person. And the other version is the loy mechachamehem, that he is not from the righteous, from the pious, nor from the wise. Be that as it may, one thing we see clearly that at least ideally, the preferred way is that the non-Jew should accept upon himself and keep them because they're God-given through Moses. From the Maimonides that we just read now, from these two laws, we learn 3 general laws. And they are, Aleph, rule number 1, Choiva al Yisrael, it is an obligation on the Jewish people to compel all the people of the world to keep these 7. It's a Jewish obligation to reach out, to influence, to do whatever they possibly can to get as many human beings, as many people as they possibly can to keep these mitzvahs. Beis, halacha number 2, the second ruling that we learn from this. Ger Toshav, v'chasid u'meis ha'olam, shtei agdoros shonos hein. Ger Toshav and the chasid from the nations of the world are 2 different categories. V'ein ben noach tzorich lekabel alav Sheva Mitzvot bifnei beis din v'yehei ger Toshav kedei liyos mechuyev bahen u'lehikarei chasid u'meis ha'olam. A ben noach is not required to formally accept them upon himself in front of a Jewish tribunal, and he's not obligated to become a ger Toshav in order to fulfill his obligation and to be from the pious of the nations. In other words, there's a separate obligation that every person has. He's got to do them. Whether or not you accept it, that's the option. That's the option. A person could formally accept it and become a ger Toshav when that applies, or not. But the or not doesn't mean that it's optional whether the person wants to keep the 7. Everyone has to keep the 7. And that brings us to number 3, Gimel. Bnei Noach chayovim l'kaim sheva hamitzvos mipnei tzivui Hashem al yedei Moshe. V'ilu lekein einam mechasidei u'meis ha'olam. The Bnei Noach are obligated to fulfill these 7 because they are commanded by God through Moses. And if they don't do it in such a fashion, they are not considered from the pious of the nations. Again, they may not be considered wicked, they may not be considered heretics, maybe not, as far as being from the wise of the nations. But one thing is for sure. Ideally and preferably, they're supposed to keep them because they are God-given through Moses. So those are the 3 rulings that we walk away with after reading that section in Maimonides. Reishis, first of all, yesh ledaktek b'mekoymam shel beis halachos elu. I was going to go into a little bit of a dissertation, if you will. We now need to focus and explain why does Maimonides write these two laws where he does, at the end of the 8th chapter of Kings. Perek Ches, Mehilchas Melachim, this 8th chapter of the Laws of Kings, done, K'hemshech lePrakim Vav Zayin, B'dinei Milchemes Yisrael Limum Esoilam, B'din Yefas Toyar. This 8th chapter is a direct continuation of chapters 6 and 7. 6 and 7 deal with the laws of a war, how the Jewish nation is to go out to war against their enemies. And then, as part of the laws of war, there is the commandment, which is a whole lecture for itself. It's seemingly an unusual type of a mitzvah for the Jewish people, and it is called the Eishes Yefas Toyar, the beautiful woman, and some of you may be familiar with this mitzvah. Basically, a Jewish soldier who's out at war fighting the non-Jewish enemy and killing them and then taking back spoils to bring back home, gold, silver, clothing, whatever, animals, whatever he's taking, if he then sees a girl or a woman that he desires. So instead of the normal situation being a Jew is not allowed to marry anyone who's not Jewish. That's a prohibition, that's absolute, that's it. There's no exceptions. Can't be. She can't even convert for the sake of marrying him. That doesn't work. Not allowed. So if any of you out there are considering marrying a Jew, either in theory or if there's a specific person that you're involved with, so that is forbidden unless you're going to convert, regardless of whether you're going to marry that person or not. This case is an unusual case. God says in the Torah that in this particular case, where the person sees this woman and desires her, he may take her back home with him, and then he's got to go through the whole process of keeping her there for 1 month, and basically he has to try to make her look undesirable and unattractive. And at the end of that, if he still wants to marry her, so then he can actually force her to convert. And if not, he must send her back free and back home. So the whole thing, many, many details about it, very unusual type of a mitzvah. So where does Maimonides speak about this mitzvah? Right over there, in these chapters where we're talking about, chapter 8, where he's dealing with the laws of war, the Jewish laws of war. Halacha Tes, in the 9th law, here in chapter 8, Mivayer HaRambam, the Rambam Maimonides explains, Heach misnagim im yefas toyar, o ir shnichbesha, shenem askim lekabel alatzma Sheva Mitzvot HaShem Noach, sheye hargu. He explains, how are we to conduct ourselves with this woman, the yefas toyar, or with a city that has been conquered, that they refuse to accept upon themselves to keep the 7 mitzvahs. When we conquer a city, we give the inhabitants of the city the opportunity to stay under our jurisdiction. We're conquering them. However, what they must accept is that they will keep and adhere to the 7 commandments. If they don't agree to keep the 7, we then kill them. That's the rule of war. Uv'halacha yud, so then, as a natural progression and continuation of that ruling, in the next ruling, number 10, Koisef HaRambam Maimonides writes, Din zeh, this ruling that we read, Shemoishe tziva lakuv es kol boi hoilam v'chulu, that Moses has commanded to for the Jewish people to compel all the people in the world to keep the 7 Noahide commandments. And then in Law 11, he then defines exactly what is a chassid, a pious of the nations of the world, that he's keeping these 7 in such a fashion. So, Vaprokim Haboyim, in the upcoming chapters, 9 and 10, Mivar HaRambam, Dine Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. Then Maimonides goes into the laws of the seven. Now he's mentioned the seven in the end of chapter 8 and said she has to accept it upon herself, and the people that we're conquering have to accept it upon themselves. And in a matter of fact, we have an obligation to get the whole world to keep them. Well, now he's got to tell us the rules of this. What are the seven? What are the details? So in chapters 9 and 10, Maimonides focuses on these seven commandments, klape atzmam, as they are an independent unit. So you could learn chapters 9 and 10 without even knowing or discussing anything to do with war or yifas toyar or anything like that. Masha'in came beperak ches. This is not the case though in chapter 8. Hadiyunu klape Yisrael. There, the discussion of Maimonides in chapter 8 is towards the Jewish people. Heyach Yisrael misnagim imus olam. How the Jewish people are to conduct themselves with the nations of the world. B'milchama, at war, yifas toyar, or this case of the woman, v'chein b'tzura klal yislokufes kol boi ha'olam. Or, likewise, in more general terms, how and what the Jewish people have an obligation to compel all of the people of the world to keep these seven. That's all chapter 8. So chapter 8 is really the Jews' interaction with the world, as opposed to chapters 9 and 10, which a non-Jew can learn those two chapters, 9 and 10, and they're written as if they're written straight for the non-Jew. Not how the Jew has to interact with them. Midiktuk zeh. So from this specification, or the nuance that we see over here, Kfar nireh sheshloisha lochos elu shetziyanu noivi me'achas ben Yisrael v'atayra shenitan l'Yisrael l'umas olam v'loi mechayvas sheva mitzvahs shel bnei Noach mitzad atzmam. So we can now see that those three laws that we mentioned, number one, that the Jews are obligated to get everyone to do it. Number two, that a Ger Toshav or Chassid u'mas olam is one who accepts it, but even if you don't accept it, you still have to keep them. And number three, that they have to keep it because it's given from God through Moses. Those three commandments are all a direct outcome and an outgrowth of the relationship that is demanded by God between the Jew and the nations of the world, but not focusing on the nations of the world as an entity unto themselves. V'lochein, therefore, yitachein ben Noach hamakayim sheva mitzvahs mitzad atzmoi meichachamehem v'loi mitzad tzivui Hashem al Moshe. Aval hu einoi loi ger toshav v'loi chasim v'masalim. That is why, in fact, you can have the following scenario: a ben Noach who is keeping the seven very meticulously. However, it has nothing to do with the Jewish people. In that case, he cannot have the title of Ger Toshav nor Chasidei Umas Olam. At best, he can be called from the wise of the nation, but not from the righteous or the pious of the nations, because he's not doing it with any direct connection to the Jewish people. And that's not the ideal way. The ideal way is that it has to be brought to them through the Jewish people. The Sefer Likutei Sichos, Don Bevir Divrei Rambam Hanal. In Likutei Sichos, which is the official name of most of the writings and talks and teachings of the Rebbe, King Mashiach. So in volume 26, that is a famous and a classic talk, an essay, where the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach formally and officially is presenting the campaign of Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, where he explains why the time is now and why it wasn't done until now, etc., etc. V'shoyel, and the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach asks the following question in that talk. Aleph. Tziva Moshe Rabbeinu mipi hagvura l'akuvus kol boi ha'olam l'kabel mitzvahs shenitztavu b'nei Noach, quoting Maimonides, that Moses was commanded by God to force all the people of the world to accept these commandments that Bnei Noach were commanded. Madua Bnei Yisrael tzrichim l'akuvus kol b'nei Noach al kiyu mitzvahsehem. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach asks a very simple, straightforward question. Why are the Jewish people obligated to force or convince or influence, whatever word you want to use. Why do we have to see to it to get the Bnei Noach keep their commandments? Beis, number 2. And Maimonides continues and says that the non-Jew has to accept it because it's God-given in the Torah, and has informed us through Moses that the Bnei Noach world were originally commanded to keep them. However, if this non-Jew, if this Ben Noach, is doing it logically, because rationally it makes sense to him, he's not a Ger Toshav, nor is he from the Pious of the nations of the world. Asks the Rebbe Melech HaMoshiach, why is it so crucial? Why do the non-Jewish Bnei Noach have to keep their God-given commandments? Because it's written in the Torah through Moses. Why can't they keep it? Because God gave them these commandments. Leave the Jews and the Torah out of the picture. Why? And we can add and ask further. What indeed is added? What did Moses add to the commandments? They already are commanded to keep these. 6 of them they received from Adam. They were repeated and reiterated to Noah, and the 7th one was added to Noah. So these have been around well before Moses and well before the giving of the Torah. So what exactly is added by the fact that Moses is commanding them? The Chama Achronim, in a number of most recent rabbinic literature and rabbinic commentators, and he lists a whole bunch in the brackets, Shalos v'Tshuvas v'Shava Kohen, Or Sameach, Chidush agrees Halevi. And these are all relatively recent, just a generation ago. Yesh laha'ir sheklolus abir shelahem shave avol einay muchrach shehem shavim b'chol protei abir. Then Rabbi Weiner says that, by the way, these 3 that he just mentioned by name, these 3 books, so in general, they all have the same explanation. Even though in detail they may differ, and their explanations in detail and certain things, but if you look at it in a very general way, they basically all have the same general idea. So Biaru Estivra Rambam. So all of these various different achronim explain the words of Maimonides. They explain why is it indeed that the Bnei Noach need to keep these commandments, because they were commanded in the Torah through Moses. Based on the words of 2 particular Rishonim, which are from the earlier commentators, Nachmanides and the Ritva. They make a distinction between the title Ben Noach, which means Noahide, a descendant of Noah, and Ger Toshav, the resident alien. Ben Noach shaloi kibel al atzmei bifnei beis din kiyum Sheva Mitzvot. So the way that they explain, a Ben Noach is a person who did not accept upon himself in front of a court to keep these 7 commandments. Aval, however, kim lon, to us the Jewish people, we know that he keeps them on his own without any formal acceptance. And therefore they say that his status and his relationship to these 7 is like a person who is not commanded and yet keeps it, meaning voluntarily. The Ger Toshav, who should keep it alatzmai lifnei beis din Yisrael Sheva Mitzvot. And what's a Ger Toshav? That's a person who accepted it formally. And then his reward is like one who is commanded. We have a general rule that the person gets a much greater reward for doing something that they're obligated to do as opposed to a volunteer. So a ben Noach who didn't formally accept them upon himself in front of a Jewish tribunal, but he does keep them, he's called a ben Noach. And it's as if he's doing it voluntarily, as opposed to the Ger Toshav. V'daitim al pia mevur b'Gemara, and their opinion, based on that which is explained in the Talmud, quoting a verse, Amad v'imoided eretz ra v'iter goyim, that it states that God saw that they're not going to keep them, so he undid them, as the Talmud explains. God saw Sheva Mitzvot these 7 commandments that the Bnei Noach accepted upon themselves. But they didn't keep them. They accepted them, but they're not observing them. Says the Talmud that God absolved their obligation. He permitted them to not keep them. Then the Talmud asks the immediate obvious question, really? Is that a fact? They're now permitted to transgress these 7? They don't apply anymore? Ella, rather, loymar, to tell us, shafilu mekaymin oisan, that even if they do keep them now, they no longer will receive the reward as one who is obligated, one who is commanded and keeps it. They lost that merit. It would have been that any non-Jew that keeps the 7 gets rewarded because he is commanded and he keeps the commandment, like a Jew keeping his commandments. But now that it's a situation where internationally they don't keep them, therefore all of those that do keep them are not getting rewarded as keeping something which is obligatory, although it is of course obligatory, but rather as voluntary. But like one who's not commanded and still keeps it. Therefore, in order for Ben Noach now to put himself into a category of being commanded to do it, because now this individual wants to put himself in the position where he is obligated to, as it was originally. So then it's an absolute necessity. The only way he can make himself be obligated or get reward as one who's obligated, he must lekabel b'fnei beis din his chayvusoi lekayim sheva mitzvos bnei Noach. He has to accept it upon himself in front of a Jewish court, his acceptance of the obligation to keep the 7. And then, and only then, is he considered and judged as one who is commanded and keeps it. Meaning, he made the choice of removing himself from a voluntary situation, from being a volunteer to becoming obligated. Al pi divreihem, so based on this approach, based on these words of theirs, efshel levar kavanas Rambam, we now can explain the meaning of Maimonides. Shachiu v'akoydim livnei Noach batla, the original obligation of the Bnei Noach has been abolished. It doesn't exist anymore. There was an obligation given to Adam and to Noach, true. But because the world didn't keep it, so based on this statement in the Talmud, that obligation is gone. Not that it's completely and totally gone. Because they are still obligated. Every human being has to keep the 7. Ella rather, they no longer are in the category of being commanded. They're no longer a commandee. They have to keep it, but not as one who is a commandee. Therefore, they do not get reward like one who is keeping a commandment that he is commanded to keep, but rather like it's as if they're not commanded to keep it. And the reward that they get is much less. It's like a person who's keeping something that they don't have to keep. Because as we said above, God saw that they're not keeping their mitzvahs, so therefore he took it away. And therefore, when God gave the Torah at Sinai, so through Moses, they now are getting a new obligation. So now they are obligated. Now they have to keep it. Why? Not Adam and Noach. That, so to say, expired because the people weren't keeping it, so God said, forget it. But now he's renewing the obligation through Moses. Umeata, and from this point on, Ben Noach that takes upon himself this obligation of keeping the 7. So then he falls into a new category. Now he's a Ger Toshav or Chassid of the nations of the world. But if he's not going to accept it upon himself through this system, because it was given by God to Moses, so if the only reason he's keeping it is because he's obligated to do so because God commanded Adam or Noach, well then we just said that no longer is considered a commandment. So therefore that which he's doing is going to get much less reward as if he is not commanded. That's how they explain it. So it comes out from this explanation is as follows. Aleph, firstly, there are two categories when you focus on what is the obligation of Bnei Noach. Aleph, A, one is that commandment which remains because God commanded Adam and Noach, and he never undid it to the extent of literally saying, forget it, don't keep them anymore. And therefore now he has to keep them. But he does not get rewarded for them. And he is considered like one who is not commanded. B. One who accepts upon himself the obligation to keep these commandments because they were given through Moses in the Torah, then this person already voluntarily put himself into a position where he's considered now one who's not a volunteer, but rather he's commanded. So he is a Ger Toshav or Chassid of Musaylam. Kloimar, meaning to say, if he is careful to keep them as he accepted upon himself, that doesn't mean that every Ger Toshav is automatically, actually up from the pious of the nations. But rather, what does it mean that one is accepting upon himself to be a Ger Toshav? That means he's accepting upon himself to be from the pious of the nations. Doesn't mean that he's going to live up to his acceptance. But what is his formal acceptance to the court about keeping the 7? That he is going to be from the Chassid, from the righteous, from the pious of the nations of the world. But one who does not accept upon himself to be a Ger Toshav cannot be a Chassid of Musaylam. So he has to formally accept it in order to be from the righteous of the Gentiles. That's one way of looking at it. Base. Number 2. Ger Toshav, the Chassid of Musaylam Hainuhach. Ger Toshav and Chassid Musaylam, one and the same, interchangeable. V'lochein, and therefore, Tzarich ben Noach lekabel al atzmoi oil Sheva Mitzvot b'fnei Beis Din Yisrael kedei liyos Ger Toshav. Therefore, if a ben Noach wants to be a Ger Toshav, he must accept upon himself, in front of a Jewish court, the yoke of keeping these 7. V'im lo kibel b'fnei Beis Din and kabbalas klum. And if he didn't accept it upon himself in front of the Beis Din, the Jewish court, his acceptance is worthless. Elokeinu mitzvah voice is still in the category of one who's not commanded and doing it voluntarily. But wait a second. According to Maimonides, we can't accept a Ger Toshav nowadays. So this whole thing, how is a person supposed to become a Chassid of Musaylam or a Ger Toshav or anything if we can't accept him nowadays as a Ger Toshav? That means, according to Maimonides, that we cannot accept a Ger Toshav nowadays. That means no Ben Noach has the ability to become a Ger Toshav, which is a Chassid of Umas Olam, which would put him in the category of commanded and keeping it. So Yesh Loimar, so we can answer this and say, the Beis Matzavim Bazeh. There are two situations when it comes to this. Yesh Zman She'anu Mekablin Oisan. Oyafilu Koifin Oisan. There is a time that we accept these Bnei Noach, or even force them. The Yesh Matzav She'anu Koifin Mekablin Oisan Kiguin Bizman Hazeh. And then there is a situation, such as nowadays, when we don't force them, and we don't accept them. But nonetheless, on their own, we're not compelling them at all. But on their own initiative, they're coming to accept them in front of a Jewish court. And therefore, nowadays, even though we don't accept them, as the Rambam says several times, meaning as far as them getting the various different benefits, could go in, for example, Lagur Beretz Yisrael, they get a right to live in the land of Israel if he's a Ger Toshav. He gets supported by the Jewish community if he's a Ger Toshav. That doesn't exist. Mikol Mokim, nonetheless, in Bola Kabbalah Atzmei Miritzoinei, Lias Ger Toshav, V'Chassid Muslim B'Fnei Gimel. But if he comes on his own to accept formally these 7 commandments, and he would like to be Ger Toshav / Chassid U'Masaylam, and he's doing this in front of 3 Jews, leading Kabbalah's mitzvahs of Mekabonoisai. So as far as his 7 mitzvahs, then we do accept him. It's just that he won't have the rights of a Ger Toshav, but we do accept him. That's one approach. Gimel, number 3. B'chidushi agrees in the book of the novel Ideas and Insights of the Grees, otherwise known commonly affectionately as Reb Velvel Brisker. Miva'er, he explains, Sheyesh din miyuchad v'chadash mimatan Torah, that there is a new special law that was given by the giving of the Torah, when the whole Torah was given. Until the giving of the Torah, a Ben Noach had to keep it because God said so. Now that the Torah is given, there's a new idea. He has to accept it upon himself because God said so in the Torah through Moses. And is completely insufficient to that he accepts it upon himself just to do them. Even if his acceptance is in front of the Jewish court, that's not sufficient at all. It has to be clearly that he's accepting it upon himself because they were given through Moses. And if he doesn't accept it as such, he should be put to death. Meaning, even if just lacking this type of acceptance, that alone he has to be killed for. You're talking about an individual who's keeping the 7. And he's keeping the 7 because they're God-given to Adam and Noach. That man still needs to be put to death. Why? Because he didn't, and he's not ready to accept it, that it's through the Torah, through Moshe. ואפילו מקבלין על עצמן, אבל אינם מקבלון משום ציווי השם על ימי שבתורה, נהרג, אף שמקבלון משום ציווי השם לאדם ונוח. Yeah, like we just said. That it has to be that he's accepting it upon himself, because so said God in the Torah through Moses. That's crucial. Once Torah was given, that's how he has to accept it. And if not, Yehareg. That is the way that the Chidush Agariz explains it. And at this point, he's now going to try to refute this approach that we just took until now. This was just presenting how these Achronim explain the Rambam, and then he's going to go on and try to refute it and then explain what's going on. And that's just the very, very beginning. So until next time, wishing all the best and continued success in observing and adhering and spreading the message of keeping the Sheva Mitzvot HaShem, because God said so in the Torah through Moses. And let's all do our part to bring about the coming and the complete revelation of our righteous Mashiach now.